So the natural world consists largely of self-organizing systems, like the ones that we just showed in that video. And hopefully you notice that even humans end up exhibiting a lot of those patterns when you get us into traffic or into a crowd. And these rule-based systems can achieve incredible complexity and elegance with no central authority or decision maker. Now, some natural systems do consist of hierarchies and pecking orders, but even in these situations, the leaders are beholden to set rules and patterns. Nature is by and large leaderless. Now, human systems, on the other hand, tend to be structured as hierarchies. We have empowered leaders up at the top, obedient followers below. If you've ever tried to organize a new group, you'll know that the first question that usually comes up is, who's going to be president? I think we like the comfort of just knowing who's in charge. Clear goals, clear directions, not having to make the hard decisions ourselves. And in urgent high-stakes situations like an emergency room or a war zone, the speed, the efficiency, the predictability of a strict hierarchy, well, those benefits make it well worth the sacrifices in autonomy or deliberation or equity. Obviously, there are drawbacks to hierarchies. When authority rests with an unaccountable individual or a few, corruption and self-dealing are basically inevitable. Very few of the people involved in an organization get to have a say, and this leads to poor decisions, throttled innovation, and a lack of buy-in. And the power structures of a hierarchy invite abuse and also create organizations that can't outlive their leaders. So hierarchies invest a few people with enormous power, but they do it by squandering the gifts of the many. So how then do we make change or drive movements or hold community without this kind of unifying center? How do we make human systems that emulate the elegance of these natural systems? Well, I'm so glad I asked. There are actually many models of leadership that don't rely on authority figures or chains of command, and I'll discuss several, but the main idea is this. Leaderless movements, instead of being personality-driven, are built around shared values, principles, relationships, and agreements. So when I was helping to get our local chapter of Indivisible up and running, we had to have the whole who's going to be president conversation. And while many of the groups I've been part of over the years have this problem of nobody wanting to be president, none of us wanted to have a president. For some reason, that title just doesn't have the same respect it once did. I don't know what happened. We ultimately decided we didn't want any officer positions at all, and we still don't. Instead, our group is led by a team of equals. Now, we each have specific areas of focus, certain responsibilities and interests that we have chosen, but no one's in charge. Every decision is a conversation and a negotiation. Now, you might be thinking, how can this be a leaderless movement if we have a team of leaders? But we're more like facilitators. We don't have any authority to make anybody do anything. Instead, we organize events. We give opportunities to the members of our group to act on our shared values in the way that they choose. We're mission-driven, not leader-driven. And this is one really good model for leaderless action. Another comes from another new local organization called United in Community, which I'm also helping to get organized. And it's, just for those who haven't heard of it yet, it's a coalition of democracy-oriented groups across the Palouse, all coming together so that we can do more together than having 8 separate movements. So this coalition aims to create a more just, inclusive, and democratic community here in Moscow, and hopefully will expand over time. But of the 8 groups that currently comprise this coalition, none of them is in charge. Instead, we have a rivers and streams model provided by the writer Scott Nakagawa. Now, one of the other United in Community members wrote up a synopsis of this model, and it was just so well written I couldn't improve on it. So I'm just going to read what she wrote. So, rivers and streams. The core idea is simple. Powerful movements are not built from a single source. They're built from many independent streams. Local organizations, faith communities, labor unions, advocacy groups, neighborhood networks, each rooted in its own community, each drawing on its own energy and leadership. These are the springs. Separately, they're real, but they're limited. A spring can water a field. It can't move a society. What changes the calculus is when those independent streams begin flowing in the same strategic direction without losing what makes them each distinct. They don't merge into a single organization. They don't dissolve their identities into a unified brand. They retain their autonomy, their local rootedness, and they coordinate. And the combined force of those streams becomes something qualitatively different from any one of them, a river with the power to reshape the landscape. This is how durable political power gets built, not by one massive organization directing everything from the center, but by many rooted organizations moving together, connected by shared goals and reliable communication, rather than institutional hierarchy. The movement is resilient because no single spring is indispensable. It's powerful because all the springs are moving in the same direction at the same time. End of the quote. So that's a second model for leaderless movements. Third model for leaderless movements is called sociocracy, and I just stumbled across this about a week ago while researching something completely unrelated to this service, so I guess it was meant to be. This one actually comes from the business world, where rigid hierarchies are usually a given. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail, it's a vast topic, but sociocracy attempts to emulate natural systems by creating complex, decentralized, nested organizations where all of the various parts are semi-autonomous. So they're both autonomous and interdependent, kind of like organs in a body. This system embeds values of equity and inclusion into every aspect of how decisions are made to create a model that has no center, just dispersed power and coordination. So if you're in a group that's looking for a different non-hierarchical model, definitely Google this one. There's a lot of great resources, and it looks very effective. A fourth model I'll speak to very briefly is matriarchy. Now, when people hear matriarchy, and I was guilty of this too, they often imagine a patriarchy, but with women in charge. But anthropologists who have studied matriarchal societies note that they tend to be far more egalitarian, decentralized, and communal than patriarchies are. And notably, men are rarely oppressed in matriarchies the way women often are in patriarchies. I don't feel qualified to say a whole lot more on this topic, but come back next week. Reverend Elizabeth will be speaking more on matriarchies at next week's service. So, where does all of this leave UUCP? Well, even with Reverend Elizabeth still here, I'd argue that this church is nonetheless leaderless already, because we're guided by our values and our covenants, not commands from on high. So as an example, as much as we love Reverend Elizabeth, if at some point she told us that we're going to give up on this whole pluralism thing and hop on the white nationalism bandwagon, would we fall in line? Would we go along with that? No, obviously not. We'd kick her to the curb. Or more likely help her get into counseling and maybe run a talk screen on her. So conversely, in a leader-defined movement, the charismatic leader at the top can contradict himself constantly, change policies and principles on the fly, break every promise, lie about everything, and the followers will obediently fall into line and do what they're told. I can't really think of any good examples at the moment. But this community is defined by principles, relationships, and covenants, not authority figures. Not chains of command. We don't obey. We choose how we want to engage with community. Yes, of course, we still have people in leadership roles, like what I'm doing now. Somebody needs to do this necessary work of organizing, calling meetings, setting agendas, making decisions, on, but it's ultimately our values that guide all of that. We are a leaderless movement here, one that harnesses the gifts of all of our members. One that respects our humanity, diversity, and democratic values. One that's thoughtful, deliberate, and compassionate, but one that still gets shit done. Just imagine if our whole society were organized this way. Now, I want to end on the topic of personal responsibility. As I mentioned at the start, much of the appeal of hierarchical structures is the desire to let someone else make the hard decisions, take the big risks. Simply following orders makes life, well, simple. These other models I've been discussing, however, they require emotional intelligence, people skills, relationship building, humility, trust, a willingness to negotiate and compromise. And I don't think it's any coincidence that men who lack these qualities are the most vocal advocates for patriarchy. That kind of mindless obedience, command and control might be all they're cut out for. But we don't need someone else to tell us what needs to be done to drive change. We get to choose to be that someone else. There isn't someone out there higher and better to save us. There's only us, and we can save ourselves. And if that sounds like too much, let me refer back to the natural world one more time. This is a passage about the wolves being reintroduced to Yellowstone. It comes from a UU World article called Kindness to the Thousandth Generation. And if you're in Wellspring, this should sound very familiar. Wolves had been hunted to eradication in Yellowstone by 1930, and for almost 70 years there were no wolves in the park. During that time, the health of the ecosystem and many species had declined. Elk, free from their predators, had munched the trees and bushes around waterways down to stubs. The beavers no longer had good materials to make their dams, so they were failing too. The numbers of fish and animals that live in the water had dropped dramatically. Birds of all kinds were struggling. The banks of the rivers had eroded, and the rivers had become shallower and slower. Everything was slowing and declining. It was as if the life force in the entire region was fading. In 1995, 8 Canadian wolves were released into the park. The pack of wolves that arrived that morning thrived and grew and eventually reached a robust population. As the wolves came back, one by one, plants along the riversides, the beavers, and all the other animals, fish, and birds began to return as well. Even the elk fared well. They just hid more in the deeper forests and didn't linger snacking by the water. The rivers themselves changed shape. They became deeper and faster flowing, with more estuaries to support wildlife, and more sharply defined banks because of better soil that was eroding less. This small group of wolves, simply by being themselves and doing what wolves do, brought back balance back to the ecosystem and life back to the earth. The biologists had tipped the first domino, and nature took care of the rest. That's the end of the passage. So these wolves had no concept of ecosystem health. The humans who did were still completely helpless to fix the problem, even with all their sophisticated knowledge. But with the missing piece restored, the system fixed itself. As the author concludes, we matter, and our actions matter in ways much broader and deeper than we could ever know. So I'd like to leave you with this idea that I think captures the heart of leaderless social change. Instead of trying to save the world, be true to yourself and trust that that is what the world actually needs.